You're listening to Art Affairs, episode 93. Today I'll be talking to Megan Ellen MacDonald. Alright, so my name is Michael Faith, and this is Art Affairs. Art Affairs is my attempt at shining a spotlight on the many wonderful people that make up this amazing art community, featuring conversations with artists, gallerists, curators, telling their stories. You can dig through previous episodes, complete with show notes, at artaffairdspodcast.com, but the best way to stay plugged in is to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're really enjoying the show and want to help support what I'm doing here in an even bigger way, check out the Art Affairs Patreon. Not only does it give you an opportunity to help keep the show going, but there are several community-oriented benefits as well, like getting early access to episodes and suggesting questions for upcoming guests. You can find all the information about that at patreon.com/artaffairs. You can also connect with the show on Instagram at artaffairdspodcast. Alright, so today's guest is artist Megan Ellen MacDonald. Megan paints beautifully rendered and lusciously vibrant paintings of nature, but a very surreal version of these plants and animals, almost like a parallel universe made out of porcelain. We talk about these contrasting elements in her work in our conversation, as well as how she first developed this porcelain-esque motif, her experience teaching art both privately and in a school environment, what she's been up to lately, and a whole lot more. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Megan Ellen MacDonald. Megan, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you on.
It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. So let's dive into your background a little bit. And I know that you're born and raised in Belleville, Ontario, which I believe is like a more rural area. But like, you tell me, what was that area like when you were growing up?
Yeah. So, Belleville is a generalization. I was technically born in Belleville, because that's where the nearest hospital is. But I grew up in Frankfort, Ontario, which is about 30 minutes outside of Belleville. So if you think Belleville is rural, then, Frankfort is like in the middle of nowhere. It's one of those, like, you could spit and you'd be at the end of the town boundary. So yeah, I grew up in a really, really rural area in Ontario. Same house my entire childhood. My whole extended family lived within like 5-minute drives. So yeah, very, very small pond, very tight-knit community. And it was great. I'm definitely a very outdoorsy person. I really enjoyed being raised outside of like a big city area. I spent a lot of time outside as a kid. Like, I think I maybe took it for granted a little bit, because now I'm trying to go back to that, spend more time outside, do more of the stuff I used to do, just kind of naturally, like foraging and, hiking, fishing, and kind of get back to that, what I was doing as a child when I didn't have internet or a cell phone.
Right.
Yeah.
So you feel like you had a pretty strong connection with nature growing up?
Yeah, I would say that. I definitely just spent so much time outside. And I was always really fascinated with like creatures, plants, like anything growing. Yeah, I just spent so much time there, and it was such a great way to grow up. And I think I definitely think there's a lot lost when we're like so connected to the internet.
Yeah.
And like even like we didn't have we had like just like the regular like 10 TV channels. We didn't have cable or satellite or anything like that. So there really wasn't a lot to do inside as a kid. Like you could just play with your toys and like talk to yourself. But all the adventure happened outside because, you meet up with all the kids on the block and go down to the river, like find some cool rocks. So
yeah, I mean, having grown up like before the age of the internet, like I can definitely relate to that. I feel like there's some amount of creativity that I think is lost when you're so just bombarded with media all the time,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think when you're disconnected like that, it forces you to become very creative to entertain yourself. And I think I definitely I think that had a huge impact on me as just like a creative person. Like I was thriving there.
Awesome. What kind of work did your parents do? Anything creative on their side?
No, my mom worked for the Children's Aid Society when I grew up, and that was a really tough job. Like it was really hard on her. And she spent a lot of time working overtime, not really around a lot when I was growing up. And then my dad worked for the city in water treatment. So neither of them did anything creative. They both grew up. My mom actually grew up on a dairy farm. And that was her father's business, which turned into soybean farming because there's this whole dairy conglomerate in Canada. It's a big thing. Yeah. So they got bought out. They ended up doing soybeans later on. But yeah, her whole family grew up on a farm, very hardworking kind of blue collar people. And then same with my dad. He worked like odd jobs doing engine repair or like concrete, roofing. So I learned a lot about working with my hands from my dad. And kind of, I have like a very DIY attitude. Like I can fix it. I can do it. I don't need to call someone. But yeah, they weren't really creative. Nobody in the family was really creative. I had like a great uncle apparently who was an artist, and like an illustrator. But I don't know too much about him, but that's the only kind of creative connection through the whole family. So
yeah, but like not like an immediate influence, I guess.
No, yeah.
Did they give you much exposure to the arts? Like, is it something that they brought into the house and like, exposed you to?
Yeah, I think out of desperation, I think, because I was a very rambunctious kid, kind of a bit of a terror, and yeah, I wouldn't want to be my parent when I was a kid. But yeah, I think the only thing that really piqued my interest as a kid was if I could be making something or building something. So very early on, they were like, my dad made me like a little stand-up easel for Christmas one year, and put like a roll of paper on it so I could just endlessly roll out the paper and just keep painting and painting. So yeah, I think that's how they kept me busy. So they were like, okay, this is what she wants to do, and she's quiet when she's doing it. Like, just give her pencils, give her crayons, like just get her out of my hair. So yeah, it was encouraged, although there wasn't like a ton of resources where I grew up, I guess. Like there was no specific school for art or really robust art programs. So it's kind of all like self-directed through my entire life, really. And I am glad they supported me. Like, they'd buy materials and stuff, or if I wanted to do like crafts or sculpting, they were like, okay, well, we'll figure something out,
And so was it something like, as you were growing up, was it something that you took really seriously? Like, when people asked you, what do you want to be when you grow up? Was it already artist, or did you have ambitions to be something else?
No, I think I vaguely remember, and I think I still have the assignment for this. I really wanted to be a dolphin trainer when I was younger, like really badly. And then I wanted to, I don't even, like, it wasn't even a job. I just wanted to ride horses.
Oh, okay.
Just something with animals. I don't know. But yeah, I didn't really consider being an artist as a profession until university. And even when I applied for art school, it was more just as a means to get out of the tiny town that I was living in. Like I was a teenager, and I was like, I need to get out of here. Ugh, there's no culture here. Which I'm not wrong. But so I was trying to find ways to like leave. And I remember my parents pushing like, oh, you can just go to the community college. Like in Belleville, it's 30 minutes away. And I was like, I'll never go to the community college. So yeah, my big thing was I packed it up when I was 18 and moved off to Toronto with 2 friends, without even, like, I wasn't accepted into university at that time. But then I ended up applying while I was in Toronto and getting into OCAD University, Ontario College of Art and Design. And when I was in that program, I was kind of like, oh, this is... I'm actually pretty good at this. Like,
nice.
Yeah. And that was kind of when it dawned on me that I could do something creative as a career. So I still wasn't sure that I could be a professional artist, but I just knew I wanted to do something that had to do with creating. Like I had to do it. It was the only thing that really stimulated my brain in the right way.
That's awesome. So you had moved to Toronto even before you decided like what you wanted to do from a college perspective?
Yeah, I applied for a few different programs. I'm trying to remember which other ones I applied for. And it just happened that one of the schools I applied for, I got accepted, but then the faculty went on strike, like right when I should have been starting. So kind of at the last minute, I was like, oh, I'll just go to OCAD then. Like, if this is a bust, like, we'll just go to, I got accepted to OCAD. We'll go to OCAD. Like, let's go. Cause I applied for a few art programs. I applied for, I want to say, no, it might have just been general art. I was thinking about going into teaching at one point, and then I was thinking about going into art therapy. That was another thing I was kind of toying around with. But yeah, I ended up at OCAD in their arts program, and I had this instructor when I was in high school who really pushed me to apply for that. He was like, "You need to go to an art school. Please go to an art school." So yeah, I ended up there about a year after I moved to Toronto, which was nice. It was nice to have a year off. I think I definitely needed that, or I think I may have kind of bombed my first year in school. There were some things I had to get out of my system, I think, as like a 18-year-old moving into the city that weren't really in line with focusing on academic studies.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I totally hear that. I read in an interview that you did that the art program there at OCAD was mostly focused on like concept development rather than, the skills of painting and drawing. And that your actual like painting techniques were mostly self-taught. So I was kind of curious, like, do you feel like that's appropriate? Like that's where their focus should have been? Or would you have preferred that they actually did more on the skill side?
Yeah, I think everybody who goes in, especially the painting program, and I mean, I've heard Jacob's interview as well, where he was kind of dragging it a little bit, because he graduated just a bit before I did. And yeah, I think I don't want to get in trouble. I do think there are huge gaps in that program, and not just in the technical skill area, even just like teaching students how to run their own business, how to do their taxes. Like if you're asking people to become self-employed artists, they need to have these skills. And so, yeah, I didn't think it was appropriate. It was quite frustrating, the direction of the school at the time I was there. And I mean, did I gain anything from that curriculum? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, because that was like my next question was it even worth your time?
It was, but not in the sense of like the course load. I was there Well, at first I was there, just to get a degree and say, hey, I did it. I went to school. I finished school. Look at me. Because my parents really did not expect me to finish I don't even think they expected me to get into university. And so partway through that, though, I met some really amazing people. And we kind of created this community within the school that had we really cultivated like a sense of sharing, practicing together. You had all this free time between classes, or after like the last class ended, and we would go into the studios and just work, and we'd all work together. We'd all share resources. We'd talk about the artist we loved. We'd talk about what art we were looking at. I learned, like, the first few things I learned about using oil paint was actually from that group of people.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I definitely think I did gain a lot there in terms of that community aspect. But yeah, not from the curriculum itself. Definitely not from the curriculum itself. There's some overhaul that could definitely be done there, but it's also a reflection, I think, of Toronto and the Canadian art scene itself.
Oh yeah.
Well, I find it's a lot harder here to get appreciated as an artist that works in a realist manner. And I think there's a real focus on work that is conceptual, like from a funding perspective even, which isn't a bad thing. There's some amazing work out there right now, amazing artists out there right now that are doing more conceptual work and do have the skill set to kind of put behind it. But it felt like there was a disconnect because they were really pushing, we want you to have strong concepts, but nobody could execute any of the work, which was really disappointing because you'd see what it could possibly be, but they just didn't have the time or the skill to really put into it.
Interesting. And so in the absence of that type of element of the program, how did you go about developing your skills and sort of identifying your, unique style?
Yeah, so I was accepted into OCAD as a sculpture student.
Okay.
Yeah, which was an interesting little tidbit there. And then partway through my first year, where you take all the different courses, I realized I hated the sculpture department because it was, again, heavily conceptual. I wasn't actually going to learn how to physically sculpt anything unless it was out of like cardboard. And so I had a really good instructor in one of my first year painting classes, Scott Sawtell, and he was really cool because he was the first person who kind of turned me on to this concept of you're not going to learn too much in the classroom, so go find other artists in the school and like go get a community going. And yeah, I kind of started to fall in love with painting through that class. I was doing like really illustrative kind of like ink and watercolor work. It was very figurative. But I decided that year, I was like, I'll just go into drawing and painting. Like this seems more fun. Let's do this. So yeah, I switched into the drawing and painting program. And then I want to say maybe around second or third year, I started to hang out with this group of artists, like all students who were just kind of like coming up with all these resources, but also some of them were taking workshops outside of the city. And so I started, like, I wanted to keep up with these people. A lot of them were like 1 or 2 years ahead of me. And I was like, I really want to keep up with these people. I want to be able to like make work on that level. And so it really lit a fire under me to just learn. And so I was looking up painting tutorials. I was asking a lot of questions of people like, how do I do this? How do I do this? And just trying to learn some of the basics. And yeah, I think after I graduated even, I was still taking workshops. We had this kind of school we put together. Peter Chan, Kina Morimoto, and a few other friends kind of put this Studio West Art School together because we all wanted to teach. People were asking to take workshops with them. And we just rented out this tiny little basement room and we're teaching these classes out of it. But the other thing we were doing was we were inviting artists to come to Toronto. We would, we'd charge whatever for the workshop for people to join. We'd get to take it for free and we'd just give all the like we'd pay for the flight, we'd pay for an Airbnb, and we'd just pay the artist, and like we didn't make any money from it. But yeah, we got Andrew Hem to come down, which was super exciting. So I got to take an outdoor painting workshop with Andrew Hem. We had Nicholas Uribe come down. Benjamin Bjorklund did like a painting demo. So yeah, I definitely learned a ton during that time of just like teaching I was teaching like a still life painting class. And then I was also in turn getting to take these workshops with all these amazing artists without having to leave the city. So
yeah, no, that's amazing that it's sort of, I guess it plugged into an element of like community organizing.
Yeah. At that time, there was like a really strong community of artists. Dominique Fung was another one who was in that building for a while. And yeah, I miss it. I definitely miss that community. But it was great. We were all in our 20s. We were all super like hungry, literally and figuratively. And so we were just like in this little basement complex with all these little, like a little maze of studios, working away. And yeah, that was a really fun time in my life. And it was really like, I experienced a lot of growth over those years. I had just graduated. And I was kind of like, well, if I'm going to be an artist, like I need to have a studio. I was having to work the entire time, but I would come in, after work, and then stay till midnight or later, just working and painting, trying to like make a body of work, trying to get group shows.
So by the time you graduated, that you had already decided that was going to be your aim, to be a gallery artist?
Yeah. I think by my final year in school, actually my final year in school, my thesis year, I was fed up with school. I was ready to get out of there. I was like, get me out of here. I can't. I'm also dyslexic. And I wasn't diagnosed. And so I just thought that I was really like bad at reading or bad at spelling. But it really it put a strain on me, like being in a university program. And I just wanted to paint. I didn't want to write essays anymore. I didn't want to, do a bunch of readings. I just wanted to make paintings. That was it. So yeah, by the end of my third year, I had a bunch of my friends were graduating and were going to do work as gallery artists. And I was like, you know what? I want to do that. And my parents were very much like, don't do that. Like, go... like get a teaching degree, like please don't do that. And I was like, no, I'm gonna do it, don't worry.
And so like after graduating, you mentioned doing other types of work, to pay the bills and stuff. What were you doing around that time?
Well, I mean, even when I was in school, I paid for my education in full. And so I was working, even while I was in school, I was working on these little odd jobs, every chance I could. It was really grueling. I don't know how I managed to do that. And yeah, so for a while I was working like within the school, and I was doing some work for like a temp agency. So I was doing office administration, weirdly enough. And then when I graduated, I did more of the office admin work. I got offered a few full-time positions and I was like, nope, I'm an artist. I can't do this. Sorry. And then for a while I was working, it was just like a series of odd jobs for a while. For a while I was working at Homebase, which is they just sell Montana paint. And I was just selling spray paint to all the mural artists in Toronto for a while. Yeah. And then I ended up as this Studio West thing was kind of coming into fruition, and as I was starting to kind of teach these little classes, I would get more and more students enrolled. And I was like, hey, this could actually, like, I can actually make money doing this, like if I run some private classes. So yeah, at one point I quit my temp job, and which felt really good. Felt really good. And then I ended up just having my studio. I was painting. I was selling some work, like for very cheap, but I was selling some work, which was really exciting. And then I was also teaching these little classes on the side, little still life painting classes. And then I want to say in 2017, I got offered a job. It's kind of a weird situation. An instructor at Humber for life drawing had to be let go. And they needed somebody very quickly. And so Peter was working there at the time, and his studio was like right beside mine. And he just came into my studio the one day and was like, hey, do you want a job at Humber? And I was like, huh? And it was this situation where they just had to really quickly hire somebody like 2 days before the class started. And they specifically wanted, because they were trying to hire like in a more equitable way. So they were like, do you know any women who would want this job? To Peter. And Peter's like, yeah, I know someone. I know somebody who teaches, and like, she's really good. I can get you her contact. So yeah, I got that job, and I've been there since. And that's kind of like my part-time gig. So, from September to April, I'm teaching 2 to 4 classes every semester there, and it's just like figurative life drawing for their animation program, which is really fun.
Very cool.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the responsibility of like the growth of another person? You know, like how do you feel about the impact that you're making on, you know, these people's lives?
I honestly love it. Yeah, I really, really like encouraging students to like pursue, you know, what they love or what they want to do, and really fostering. The one thing I tried to take from my experience in school was I do really try to foster a creative community in the classroom. And I'm like, you guys, like, you should be drawing outside of class. You should be like sharing resources, like show me what you're working on that isn't just in this class. And yeah, I think it's an interesting situation because I teach one of the only analog courses in that curriculum, because they're all 3D animators. They're on the computer, they're learning all the programs. But we have, you know, 3 hours every week where they come into the life drawing room and get to just like with their hands, not on a tablet, which is something I really encourage, is like to not use the digital tools, to just get in there with charcoal and a big pad of paper, and just enjoy the process of drawing. Like just like learn the anatomy. Yes. You know, learn how to set up a pose. Yes. But also just enjoy the break, you know, like just enjoy that you're not glued to a computer for 3 and you're like with your friends in this room, and you can all chat and have a good time. We listen to music. So yeah, I really like inspiring the students. That's like the big thing.
That's awesome. And like, I guess as far as creating a curriculum, is that a challenging thing? You know, so I imagine there's a lot of like upfront work that has to go into developing it. Like teaching it is one aspect, like one challenge of its own, but like developing all of the material that goes into a curriculum, I mean, I feel like people take that for granted.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's rough. I've found ways to streamline a lot of that since I've been there for so long now. And because I teach kind of the same classes each year, like the first few years it was really tough because I was having to develop like a fully new curriculum. They didn't have anything for me to work from like when I showed up. So yeah, it was a lot of work, but it was also really great because at the time I hadn't been doing a lot of, like I would do some life drawing every once in a while, but it really refreshed. Like I was like, wow, I've got to really go back and think about like, how did I learn this? And then I have to deconstruct that and put it into 14 weeks, like, and figure out how we get from point A to you can now draw, you know, a figurative pose within a minute pretty accurately. It's a lot of working backwards. Like it's a lot of like trying to figure out how do we get there in, you know, this amount of time. But yeah, I really like it. I like developing course material. I like teaching. So I don't find it, the only struggle is just the typing portion. And I have to kind of like tell the students when they come in, I'm like, I'm dyslexic. So if you see a spelling error, either like politely point it out or don't say anything.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are great about it. I always have like a couple students who are like, I'm dyslexic too. Oh my God. So yeah, we can really relate in that way. I think it's definitely hard, but it's worth it.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. I mean, it's really cool to have somebody as invested in the students as they are. You know, it sounds like you really kind of thrive in that environment. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
So like dialing back to the time between graduation and your beginning of teaching when you were doing, you know, temp work, was it difficult for you to balance that, you know, kind of your day job work with the very early beginnings of your art career, like getting on your feet as far as your art practice goes?
Yeah, it was grueling. It was rough. I'm not even gonna sugarcoat it. There were times where I was like, I think I want to give up. I don't think I can do this. Toronto's not like a cheap city to live in. And like, even back then, like I had a budget where some nights I was like, I don't think I can afford dinner. Like, what do we do? Or just like eating instant noodles all the time, which is probably not good for my health. But yeah, I wanted to, like, everything I was making, I was basically just funneling back into this art, like, thing that I wanted to do in this art practice. I'd go to work, I'd work a full-time job, and then I'd go to my studio, probably, like, I'd just straight off the bus, like at 6, get into the studio. A lot of the guys had been there all day, and I was like, shit, I gotta catch up, you know? Like, oh my God. And so I'd be there till like 1 a.m. And like, it was a good thing I lived pretty close to the studio at that time, so it wasn't too big of an issue. But yeah, it was basically like work, paint, get 6 hours of sleep, repeat, like constantly. It was tiring and it was tough. I was doing all these little like art fairs and like group shows and stuff like that. And definitely like it was defeating at times where I was like, I wish I had more time to work on this. I wish I had the finances where I could just, you know, have a trust fund and have a studio and not have to worry about this. So yeah, it was definitely, I did feel like I was at a disadvantage for a really long time, both financially and just like time wise. Just because, you know, I came out of school with like 40K in debt and was trying to pay that off, trying to work, trying to have a studio. Yeah, it was a struggle. Like I couldn't do it now. It was definitely like something I could do in my 20s. And like I only had so much steam for that. So I was happy when that kind of ended.
Do you feel like that, I mean, just looking back, do you feel like that struggle strengthened you in ways that maybe you wouldn't have gotten to a certain point had you not gone through it?
Absolutely, 100%. Like I think I wouldn't be the artist I am today without having gone through that and like putting in that amount of work. Because it really became like the more I invested time-wise, money-wise, into this thing, the more I was like, I have to make this work. Like, I have to do this. I have to put the work in. I have to be at this level where my work is going to sell, where I'm going to get into a gallery, because I've already put so much time into this. Like, I can't give up. Like, it would just be, I'd be such a wiener if I gave up right now, you know? Yeah, so it definitely did, kind of solidify the need to do this thing. Yeah, to see it through. it's easy to give up on something when you're not invested. And then like, if you're super invested, you're like, I have to see this through.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I guess it solidifies your resolve and makes you just more committed to the practice. And so, like, you mentioned that you were starting to show in some fairs and some group shows, and I know according to your CV, you really started to get into more of those around 2015, 2016, showing around, you know, the Toronto area. Were you getting really involved with the gallery community, or how did you start getting your work noticed by galleries in the area?
Yeah, so I was already going, like, one of the things this group of friends and I would do is go, most of the galleries in Toronto at the time were all within a certain strip, and they'd all have openings on Thursday nights. So on Thursday nights, we didn't work in the studio. Like, Thursday nights, we were out, we were walking along, we were going to all the different openings, we were getting free drinks, we were students, we loved it. And so, yeah, it was this like fun thing to do, super social. And so I met, I met a lot of artists that I really like loved and respected at that time, like Nick DeGenova and a few other people, Matt Bain. And there was this one particular gallery that I was really interested in showing with, La Gallery at the time, that was run by Will Cousy. And it was like a smaller gallery, but it was the only gallery that was showing this kind of like more illustrative geared work, or like more contemporary young artists' work. And so I was kind of like, that's the one, like, I'm gonna get in there. You watch me. And so Will actually bought one of my paintings from my grad exhibition.
Nice.
And, you know, kept an eye on what I was doing. I would go into the gallery every once in a while and kind of just sit and chat, be a little annoying like that. But he definitely expressed that he had an interest in showing my work and wanted to see how it evolved. So after a few different like smaller fairs, after a couple years, he offered me a solo exhibition at the gallery. And I was like, awesome. Yes, let's do it. I also had like a really good fair booth with them at the Toronto, like Art Toronto fair, that like I think almost everything sold. And he was like, yeah, we'll take you, like, you've got this. So yeah, I had a really great show with them. I worked with them for a bit until they closed. He went on to do secondary market stuff, because around that time, you know, the rent prices were increasing. A lot of galleries were shutting down. Like the gallery scene here is not what it was in 2015. It's few and far between now. So yeah, it was kind of just like very old school networking. Like Instagram still wasn't a big thing on my radar. Like doing kind of social networking. And so I was like, well, I got to find something here. Like, I'm not going to move out of the city because I can't afford to. So I got to find something in Toronto. And so that was good for a while. And then there was Gallery Yoon in Montreal that I worked with a couple times as well. Again, like a kind of like a smaller gallery, but still showing some really interesting contemporary work. And that was good. I sold a few things. It wasn't like super lucrative though, I would say. And I really did feel like this just had to be like a step, you know, this wasn't the end. I didn't just get into like a nice big gallery and I wasn't, you know, selling all my work. And so I was like, okay, like, what do I do now? Like, where do I go from here? Because I was getting a lot of feedback that my work wasn't really something that people in Toronto would want to invest in or buy.
Back to what you were saying earlier about it being more conceptual. Focused.
Conceptual and very conservative as well. Like one of the biggest feedbacks I would constantly get was just like, it's too colorful. Like, people don't buy that here. Which I was like, come on, guys. Be a little gay. Come on. What's wrong with you? I do have some great collectors. Like, I can't throw shade at everybody because I do have a couple collectors who have kind of like seen me through from the start of my career and are still super supportive. But they were like the unicorn collectors, they were collecting weird stuff. So I was like, okay, I'm the weird stuff. All right, I get it. So I kind of realized around, I want to say 2017, I was like, I can't have like a vibrant career here. And I think a lot of artists realize that. And the main thing they do is they just leave, they move out. Like we don't get a lot of really good artists sticking around Toronto, unfortunately, just because of how much it costs to live here. But also, like, it's just not a supportive community for people who are doing really interesting stuff. And so a lot of people are just like, well, if I want that career, I have to get out of here. Like, I have to go to Berlin, or I have to go to Japan, or I have to go to New York. Like, I can't stay in Toronto. So, and I wasn't like, well, I'm not going to move. I'm just going to up and move. Cause I'm still, at that point, I'm still in debt, like still trying to pay off my school debts. So I was like, how do I make this work? And for a long time, like for a few years, it was really frustrating. I didn't know how to like really get myself out there. And I was kind of just making work, but I had no real plan for what was going to happen to it. You know, I was just kind of like, well, I really want to make paintings, and I'm still, you know, working on getting better at creating. But yeah, it wasn't until about 2019 that I actually got offers from galleries outside of Canada. And I was like, oh, okay, I can do this online. People are like, no longer do I have to sit in the gallery and annoy you. I can just annoy you online. So yeah, in 2019, actually a little before that, I was doing some group shows with like Spoke Art, and then with Dasha as well. We did the Not Safe for Work show, which was really fun. And the reception of my work outside of Toronto was just excellent. Like I was like, wow, people actually like what I'm doing and appreciate it. And they like color. So yeah, I was like selling a lot of work. And they were like, hey, you know, there's such a great response to your work. We want to like sign you on as one of our artists. And I was just like, I found my people.
Very cool. It's very validating.
Yeah.
So how did they connect with you? Like, being in Toronto, was it, you said you got on the internet. Was it social media was how you connected with them?
Instagram. Yeah. I started kind of trying to cultivate a better understanding of how to use Instagram, and like a following. And then, I actually the funny thing is I met Ken in person in 2012 at the Spectrum Fantastic Art Convention in Kansas City, Missouri.
Kansas? Wow.
It was, right. I don't want to go back, that's for sure. It was a trip.
No shade to Kansasites.
Yeah, it's just, it is what it is. It's very flat. So I was there with Kata because he and a friend of ours had both gotten a booth, and I was like, I'll come along. This will be hilarious and fun, because I have no relationship to this fantastic art expo at all. It was really fun. I met so many great people there. I was so thrilled I went, because it was the first time they had done it live. And so kind of all the artists had just showed up. Like, we all showed up and there was barely anyone else there. And we were just all kind of hanging out. And like, it was like, I met, Jao Ruiz, and who else did I meet while I was there? Jeff Simpson came with us because he was our other Canadian. I'm trying to remember who else I met. But anyways, I met Ken during this like artist panel, and we were just sitting there chatting. And so, yeah, since then he had kind of like kept an eye on what I was doing. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. Like, thanks, Ken. Yeah. And at the time, like, he didn't have a gallery when we met, but we just kind of kept in touch. And then Dasha curated me into one of their shows. She had found my work online and was like, I want to work with you. And she and I just clicked. She is an amazing, amazing woman. I just love working with her and Jen. They are such fabulous people. Yeah, it just feels like home there. It's very cozy. Everybody is so kind, so lovely, and so in tune with kind of like where I am and the kind of person I am. So it's a really good vibe. So yeah, I kind of just met them online, went to LA, had an excellent time the first time when I was there, and just yeah, it's been great.
Very cool. And so like your first solo show with them was in 2021 with that LA show, and then you showed again the next year in New York, which is incredible. But like looking at the dates on your CV, you had so many shows in like 21 and 22. Like
you noticed.
Yeah. Like there was a solo show at 21 and like 4 group shows, and then in 22 you had 2 solo shows and like 3 group shows or 2 or 3 group shows. So like, how did you keep up with all of that? Like, was that pace exhausting?
It was soul crushing. But it was so exciting because it was the first time where I felt like I was actually getting these big opportunities, and I didn't feel like it was appropriate for me to say no. Well, and I'm glad I truly am glad I didn't. Because like both those shows sold out. The show I did at the Brantford like art gallery was excellent. It was a beautiful show. Yeah, I definitely took a step back after all of those and was like, okay, I'm thoroughly burnt out. I think the last 2 paintings I made for that New York show, I was like crying while painting them. I was like, my wrist was like, I had like carpal tunnel and tendonitis, and I was like, I'm dying. Yeah, so I was like, we won't do this again. Like, I had to make a promise to my fiance. I was like, I won't do it again. I promise. So yeah, I definitely experienced like a little bit of burnout after all of that, but it was worth it. It was definitely worth it to get those opportunities and to have those like really amazing shows. Yeah, I've been told I paint fast. I don't think I paint fast, but the guy who photographs my work is always like, you paint really fast. Like, how do you just keep coming up with this? Like, yeah. So I think I'm pretty efficient in the studio as well. Just after all those years of having to like roll up while I'm half asleep and make a painting.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, I just noticed that series. So, like, how did you said you kind of got burned out for a little bit. What did you like do a better job of saying no at that point? Like, is that a muscle that you now have some experience with? Yes,
I have said no a few times now this year. I've just been like, I don't have the work available. I don't have the time. Yeah, it was really a process of just like, I even just said to Ken, I was like, I need a year off. Like, I'll do some group shows, but I need a year off. And yeah, it was just a process of being like, I have to take care of myself. And I'm not going to have a lot of my work is made from like experiences, inspired by experiences. And so I was like, if I'm just in the studio 24/7, I'm not experienced. The work's just going to become super redundant. So I need to go camping. I need to go fishing. I need to go for a walk outside every once in a while. And so that actually inspired me to, get a dog this year.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, because I was like, I want to spend more time outside, and a dog is just that's gonna force me to go outside.
Yeah.
I have to go outside at this point. I'm not a winter girl. I'm a really bad Canadian. So I definitely hermit a lot in the winter, and the dog forced me to like go for hour-long walks in the winter, which is something I usually won't do. So yeah, it was nice to kind of just say this year is for me. I need this.
Oh, that's good. So you mentioned trying to to still stay connected with nature. Obviously, nature plays a big role in your work. So, and the fact that you grew up in such a nature-rich area and had that strong connection. How have you been able to, or have you been able to keep that connection intact as you've lived in such an urban environment?
Yeah, Toronto is weird. It's like surprisingly not urban in a lot of ways. And it is excessively urban in other ways. But yeah, I don't take anything I have here available in the city for granted. So like I live a block away from one of the largest parks in the city, which is amazing. There's so much wildlife in my area, and I live in like a very condo dense area, but there are these little pockets of like really rich wildlife. We have coyotes, we have groundhogs, we have raccoons. There's a beaver in the pond down the street. So yeah, I would say it's there if you look for it. it's whether or not you're looking for it. And same with like by the studio, I have all these little, because I walk the dog now all the time, I've found all these little foraging areas, which are really nice. So there's a bunch of mulberry trees. There's black raspberries. This year I found morels, which was super exciting. I was thrilled about that because my fiance is a chef, and so every time I find like foraged food, I'm like, make it for me, prepare it, make it nice. Right. Yeah, and then when I have time, I like to get out of the city as much as possible, especially in the summer. The winter it's a lot harder, but one of the big things I love to do is just go backcountry camping. So like completely off the grid camping. We eat very well when we do that. Fishing, and I'll catch and cook whatever if I'm lucky enough to catch something. Right. Last year was really, really fruitful, and this year has been no fish. Which is disappointing, but there's still more summer to happen. Yeah, so I'm always trying to get out of this urban environment, either while I'm stuck in it, or if you drive 2 hours anyway outside of Toronto, you're in the middle of nowhere, so it's okay. Yeah.
And so how do you feel that these experiences and just nature in general, what role does that play in your work?
Yeah, so my work started, I'm not going to go through the whole evolution because that could take a while. But for a while I was doing a lot of still life referential work. And I still am. Because I have a really, I find I have a connection to still life themes, I guess is the way I describe it. I find it really interesting that was the only type of work that was available for women for centuries. It's well, if you're gonna paint, it has to be little objects. You can't nothing else. Well, because it was inappropriate for a woman to study anatomy. So it was
oh, really?
You can only paint little flowers. And so if you look at 16th, 17th century still life, there's almost this secret language of things. And specifically in the work that women were making, Clara Peters, Rachel Roush. And I was really interested in creating my own little secret language of objects. And so it kind of evolved. I was playing around with the concept of memento mori, which is death is inevitable. And it's a huge theme in still life. And I ended up thinking about it in relation to what I was kind of experiencing or coming across in nature, because nature is kind of death is around you and inevitable and constant. And so I was kind of reflecting on that. And it would just start to draw in all these little experiences that I was having. And slowly things it was the still life started to leave the table, It was just the objects were leaving the table and they were out there. And I'm still working from stuff that seems really non-organic, like the surfaces and the textures. But now it's becoming its own little ecosystem, which I really, and like the narratives are expanding that way. So that's kind of how it's kind of drawn itself into my paintings and my practice.
I'm glad you brought that up, because it's like nature but porcelain.
Yeah.
Sort of like it's so like, how did that porcelain, shiny aesthetic become like such a central component of your style, and really like embody like what your look is effectively?
Yeah, it's an interesting little thing. So I was working, before I learned how to model in 3D or do any of the 3D stuff, I was just doing like straight up still life. And I was like doing all these compositions and some photo editing. But there was like a big focus on like the material all the time. And I really enjoyed painting like shiny porcelain material. And then when I started doing the 3D stuff, there was a series of work I did, and I was really inspired by Gertrude Stein's poems, the Tender Buttons. And it's like, it's absurd, like it's absurd use of language, but she has all these like contradicting like objects and descriptors in it, like tender buttons too, right? And some of them are like slightly sexy, just like loosely sexy. Some of them are just weird. But I was really interested in this idea of like the material not representing the object completely. So the material being very foreign to the object. And so I made this painting, and it was like very directly inspired by the poems, but it was tender glass, because I was like,
okay,
it's not soft, it's like very rigid and hard, but also kind of delicate. And yeah, I just kept playing around with that, like how can I make these things seem really off-putting, or well, not off-putting, but just like delicate and yet wrong, in their material. And it definitely led into that memento mori theme, where it was like, porcelain can't rot and go bad. Plastic doesn't leave this earth.
Right.
Yeah, so it's definitely like evolved from that. But I think the glossiness and the shininess and the fact that it feels like a very manufactured thing is a very important part of the work, because it has you reflect on, the materiality and the mortality of things.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think that's one of the things that I find most interesting. And so one thing that I've also noticed is how human is like how humans are represented in your work. So like there's several of your pieces that you have a hand reaching in, but it's very flat and like porcelain-esque, and it always has the same like gold rim around it. I mean, I love that you've been consistent with how you kind of represent some of these things. So tell me about that. Like, what is humans' role in the work? If most of it is around nature and some semblance of still life, what role is humanity playing in it?
Yeah, so number one, like I always want it to feel like you're an observer, like you're not present in this place. You're maybe an observer or watching. And then, yeah, with the kind of interactions with the hands, and there were a couple, actually there's one I'm working on right now that is a little figurative. I'm trying to slowly bring like a figurative element without having it then become about the figures or humans.
Right.
Yeah. And so like, just as it's almost like the hand is an intervention, like just a very short intervention into this space, but it's also an object. Like it's not a person's hand very clearly. And part of that was inspired. I do have like a pretty extensive collection of porcelain tchotchkes from when I was doing all these still lifes. And there's like these hands, and they're so weird. They're these gloves, and they're just in different configurations. None of them look natural. Like they all look kind of terrifying. But yeah, they're these little decorative gloves, either like reaching or like they look like the thing like hanging out, you know? And yeah, I was inspired. I was like, what if I just put these gloves in here? Because I had a series where I did boots as well, because a big tchotchke collectible are little shoes. Like,
oh yeah.
why? I don't know. But yeah, these little kind of Victorian shoes. And so I was like, what if the shoes are like stepping on stuff? Yeah, so just these little kind of human interventions, but they don't even really feel like they have a physical embodiment, I guess.
No, I love it, and I love that it's sort of there's consistency in it, and in how inorganic it looks, you know.
Yeah. Well, and that's really like still trying to like, I think the repetition and the consistency comes from trying to like develop that language of objects. It's like you have to be consistent for it to really stick, you know.
And with those symbols and the language that you've developed, I'm always kind of curious if that's something that you went in with that in mind intentionally up front and you kind of developed this language of symbols, or if it was something that you identified after the fact. You like painted things in more intuitively, and then you represent, this is actually what I was thinking at the time, and I didn't even realize it, you know? So was that language something that you defined up front, or that you just observed after you worked for a while?
A lot of it, I think, is premeditated, I'd say. Like I do a lot of sketching. I do a lot of like brainstorming ideas, and some of the ideas don't even come to fruition until like 2 years after I did the first sketch. And I just keep like brainstorming this idea. It's like stuck in my head. And yeah, a lot of it is like cheeky plays off of things that would normally be in still lifes, like traditionally, but maybe had like a completely different meaning, separate from what I'm trying to make it mean, or force it into. So yeah, like things like oysters are like a really, they're like the symbol of like lust in a lot of still life paintings, or like excess of lust. Lemons, definitely important, but I always try to make mine look a little nipply. Yeah, and then there was this, but some of them are by accident. Like there was one where I just kept wanting to put like strings of pearls on things. Like I was like really into this concept of putting strings of pearls onto things. And this was when I was doing like this was during when I was making that Modern Love body of work, which is like it's a little inappropriate in a lot of ways, which I love about that body of work. Because somebody came into the gallery and Dasha was telling me they looked around and were like, are these supposed to be sexy? Yeah, and so the string of pearls, I was kind of playing around with this thing of like a pearl necklace, and then I was like, pearl necklace, like
right.
Means something completely different. And then I was like, yes, we'll use it everywhere now. Yeah, so there's definitely some things that are happy accidents, and then there are others that are like really deeply thought about and like premeditated. Yeah.
Nice. And so like this idea of taking still lifes and bringing them out of the still life into the real world, or into like, out of their element, I guess what story or what is the narrative around that you're trying to tell? And do you feel that your work is narrative in a way?
Yeah, I think usually when I make a body of work, I try not to put myself in a little box, and like be like, this is the story I have to tell, and this is the story I'm telling. So yeah, the individual little ideas are definitely premeditated, but the way the larger bodies of work come together, I like to think of it as like more of an anthology of stories instead of like telling one, like instead of a novel, I'm telling all these little stories, and there might be a cohesive theme throughout them, or a connecting theme, but they're not so literal in like every piece has to mean this, or every piece has to mean the same thing. So yeah, like right now, the body of work I'm working on kind of came from 3 pieces that I started. And then I was like, I think I can start to make a body of work around this theme that I'm seeing entering all of the pieces. So yeah, that happens a little more organically.
I love that comparison to like a collection of short stories or an anthology, something that has some element of consistency throughout it that you feel, but maybe don't necessarily are able to like articulate, you know?
Yeah. I mean, anthologies are my favorite type of book. So like, I would rather have like 10 really fun short stories than like go through like a whole, novel of something. I think that's the goal with the bodies of work, is just to kind of tell a few different stories. And a lot of my work is personal in some way, like either about a personal experience or trying to like articulate something personal. And I don't always think that has to be so literal in like, I need you to know this thing. I need you to know this means this. I like to see how people relate to them or react to them. And it's always like a fun bonus when they do relate to it in the same way that I do. But I also like, I'm well aware that I'm a very specific type of person, and not everybody is going to have those experiences or relate to the work in that way, or they can't. And that's fine.
Have you ever been surprised by somebody's interpretation of a piece? Maybe something you didn't expect?
Think if that's ever happened where I've been like, wow, I didn't think of that at all. No, I think it's usually pretty consistent. Like people are like, I really relate to this as a woman, or I really relate to this as a girl. To me, this like talks about womanhood or girlhood. And that's always really nice. I find there's definitely like a bit of a disconnect sometimes when like older men are looking at my work. Like I had a meet, I had a studio visit with a really, really well-known art dealer in Toronto, and like very like he's in his 70s. And he kind of came in and looked around and was like a little bamboozled. I wasn't even sure why he wanted to meet with me to discuss my work, to be honest, because I was like, there's no way this is going to like work out. And you could just feel the disconnect when he was looking around, and he was kind of like, well, what are these about? And then I remember him making a comment that was like, I don't know. It just feels like, you know, everything that needs to be said has been said with still life. And my you probably could see my jaw hit the floor. Like,
right.
Just like, are you serious? Because I was like, yeah, by men, you know, but we're doing something completely different here. And it was just like, it was one of the worst studio visits I've ever had, because it was just like, there was no way he could relate or connect with the work. Like, he was like, it's nicely painted. I don't like the colors.
That's one of the best things about your work is the colors. I love the colors.
Right.
So I think a consistent theme in this entire show is that Toronto art market is just completely out of touch with
yeah, well, I mean, you
taste.
come here and like everybody wears like a gray coat, you know, like it's
okay.
there's no color in Toronto. It's a very gray place.
That's a shame. As far as like ideation, like how do you approach developing an idea for a new piece? Do you have like brainstorming activities or things like that, daily sketch routine?
No, I mean, I pretty much draw on the daily, and it's not like something I have to initiate. But it's very like my sketches for my paintings. Sometimes it actually starts with a word or like a phrase. And then I start building off of that. And again, it's just this kind of like, I keep going with that idea until I think I've kind of fleshed it out as much as I can as like a little doodle. And then I go straight into the 3D process and start. So like, let's say my idea, like the one with the wiener dogs that I did for the Love of Dog show at Hashimoto. That one, I just had this idea of like 2 wiener dogs entangled like little hot dogs. It's like, I need them tangled up. And I just kept drawing it obsessively. And then, yeah, I took it into 3D, sculpted these little wiener dogs. And then it took a while for me, like more sketches to kind of come up with what is going on. Like, what's the context? What are they doing? They've caused some sort of tornado of chaos, you know? but they're super happy about it. They're just super happy about it. And so, yeah, I think like the note I had for that one was just like, it has to be something to do with like hump day or something like that. So, like it's dogs, and yeah, so there are these little notes like happy hump day. Yeah, so it's a little cheeky and chaotic in my sketchbook for sure. Then it goes straight into 3D. I start sculpting things, kind of throwing it together. And I really relate to 3D in a way where I think it's like creating a still life setup, like a still life composition. Like I used to take a table and I would put a cloth down, and now I build a table and I, do a gravity system where the cloth falls on the table.
Wow.
And kind of set it up that way. So yeah, and I'm lighting it, and like it feels very normal, like this way of setting things up. Like the first time I did it, I was like, this is amazing.
So how did that enter into your process? I mean, how did that like evolution of building out the environment of a still life go from real world tactile experience to the 3D software?
Yeah, so I was actually teaching at Humber before I really got into 3D, but I was watching what a lot of my students were doing and was like, that's really cool. Like, and it didn't click for me as something I could integrate into my work until I took a residency in Vermont. And I was talking to another artist about like shadows, like these impossible shadows that you have to kind of come up with. And he was like, oh, I just took 3D. I made the thing in 3D. And then because it didn't have a shadow on it and I needed a shadow, and I just did the shadow, like I figured out what it would look like in 3D. And I was like, huh? And so I had all this time there. So I started playing around with that. And it took a few months for it to make its way like into the paintings in a way that worked. And it took quite a while for me to like learn how to use it efficiently.
Right.
But yeah, I just started doing like Blender tutorials because there were other things I wanted to do. Like the objects I was using were so stiff, and I was like, I just want to move this little like piece in this way so it looks like it's interacting with this thing. And one of the things I was really trying to do was like get the boots to look like they were standing on things, but it just wasn't working. And yeah, so I was like, I can do that in 3D. And I remember one of the first ones I did was like the shoe stepping. And I was like, yeah, it's getting squished. Like, it's so exciting. So now I use it almost like I don't do anything outside of that. For a while, it was kind of like integrated. It was like half photo, half 3D. But now it's all 3D, and it's great because I talk about that language of things, and I have folders of all these things.
Yeah.
And I can just reuse them and like
Wow.
retexture them, or like, maybe I made one a year ago and I want to just kind of like revamp it. So yeah, it was surprisingly very simple to integrate it into my painting practice. Like it felt really natural.
That's really cool. And so is that what you mainly use to develop like the composition of like work out all the compositional elements?
Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah, everything is in 3D now. Yeah, and like this goes back to when I said originally I was supposed to be a sculpture student, and now I feel like I'm actually using that part of my brain and that skill, and it's like full circle come back into my painting practice, which is really exciting.
That's amazing. And so we mentioned your use of color. When does color come into the picture? Do you also integrate that into the 3D work, or is that something that you do later?
I play around with color like loosely in the 3D. It is hard to compose it in a way that speaks to painting, if that makes any sense. A lot of my color like decisions actually happen when I select my palette for the painting and kind of figure out, what's the range I'm looking for here. Because a lot of my palettes are really tight, like they're really tight in color. And so part of that process is just forcing that palette into the painting and playing around with do I want to do like a predominantly orange piece, or like what's the range of color I want here, and how do I really harmonize all these crazy colors,
Yeah.
and that in and of itself is a skill. I teach like a color class just because it's like a lot of people want to paint these super colorful pieces and just don't know how to harmonize it or balance it out. So it's a challenge, and it's something gets a little easier the more I do it, I think.
And so, you said that doing it in 3D doesn't always equate as well to painting. So how do you do like a color study, or like what's your method for developing the palette for a piece?
Yeah, so I do most of my sketching now on my iPad. It used to be that I would carry around like a bag of colored pencils everywhere I went, which just wasn't fun. So yeah, now I do most of my color studies just on the iPad, like just fart around with color that way. I usually do like 3 or 4 different options just over top of the doodles. Yeah, or sometimes sometimes I just know like this painting has to be this color. And then I end up just like right off the bat, don't have to do any color studies. Like this is it. Like that bee one I did, I was like, this has to be yellow. This has to be so yellow. So yellow. And I have a pretty good like understanding of color at this point. So it's pretty easy for me to like harmonize a palette just kind of like on the fly. Yeah.
That's awesome. And so you mostly work in oil in addition to the 3D work that you do leading up to the painting. What is are there other mediums that you'd like to explore that you just haven't had the opportunity to?
The only thing I'm really interested in doing right now, and it goes back to the 3D, is I do want to 3D print some of the things and like make little sculptures based off of them, or have them like, come out of the screen and off the canvas a little bit. So that's something I'm like, it's in the back of my mind. I'm still looking into like how to make sure those files are formatted correctly. But yeah, that's something. But no, I'm very comfortable and happy with oil paint. I have a passion for it. I love painting in oil. There's nothing that even comes close for me. So yeah, I think I'm happy where I am.
What is it about oil that you have such a strong love of it?
It's just the layering of it. Like the way you can layer it is unlike any other medium, like acrylic, gouache, watercolor. And one of the things that I'm always have always been drawn to with oil paint is just the translucency of it in some areas. Like I love looking, I love going to a museum and looking at like a classical painting, like a Rembrandt or something, and just like seeing the depth, because it's just pigment suspended in oil, right? And so there is depth to it, which I think is really, really cool about oil paint. And I like to utilize that when I'm painting. That's part of how I get those vibrant colors, is I'm just layering them until I get that intense depth of color.
That's amazing. So let's talk about what you have coming up. What has been your main focus lately, and what does the rest of 2024 look like for you?
Rest was my main focus.
Right.
Rest and my dog. I have a solo show coming up. I wasn't resting that much. I have a solo show coming up in November, in the San Francisco space with Hashimoto.
Nice.
And then there's a group show, their 10th anniversary, opening in August. I want to say the first week of August. Yeah, and so I'll have a piece in that as well, and that's the first piece I've kind of sent anywhere in a while, which is exciting, but it's part of the new body of work. Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at. I don't have anything booked past that, and I'm kind of okay with that. I'm teaching a lot. Like I do have some private classes I'm running. One starting in September, another's going to start in January. The private, kind of online painting classes. That's what we're doing.
You mentioned the online painting classes. I noticed you had a couple that just wrapped up, I think, recently. An oil painting process and a color theory and mixing class. How do you feel that those private classes compare to what your experience teaching in a school has been?
It's very different. Everybody wants to be there. You know what I mean? Yeah, I mean, I don't have to grade them either. I think it's a different vibe. Like I get a lot of professional artists or people who are like just starting to build their art career who take painting classes. And it's like, and from all over the world too. Like I have students who will tune in from like Japan or the Netherlands, like, and it's like midnight for them and they're like, I'm here. So it's definitely a level of dedication that is unmatched with the painting classes. They're small. Like I try to keep it to about like 8 to 10 students just so I can give everybody my full time and attention. But yeah, I love teaching those courses. I just had so many people who were like, I really want to learn painting from you, but I'm in, Texas, I'm in Ohio, I can't, I'm in Vancouver. And so, yeah, during COVID, I actually played around with that because I was already using all that technology for my Humber class when we were in lockdown. And I was like, I have all these cameras, I have everything set up, I know how to do this. Like, why don't I just run my own? And then I don't have to worry about people being in Toronto to take the class. And yeah, it was so successful. Like I sell out those classes almost every time because I think people are always looking, like I was looking as a student, people are always looking for accessible like classes and resources to learn painting because there's not a lot of people teaching it out there. Yeah.
Do you approach the online classes differently as far as like curriculum and material and just your approach to teaching the material differently than you do in your regular classes?
Yeah, it's a lot more, like I would say it's a lot more technical. It's a lot more geared to people who have, because when I teach life drawing, a lot of the time I get students in there, they're first year students. They've never drawn a figure before. So I'm starting from like level 0, working my way up. It's nice to work with people who have a foundation. So that's usually the type of person who takes my class. And then I'm just kind of doing like much more technical, much more expansive kind of color theory or like painting techniques with them, which is really fun. It's really fun to do. It's fun to see what they do with it too, because again, a lot of them are artists. So I get to see like their next body of work and how the class has kind of informed that. Yeah, which is really exciting.
Very cool to see kind of the direct result of what you've taught,
Yeah. It's really, really nice to have that experience. And I tell them, I'm like, send me more updates. Like I follow them on Instagram. So I get to see like what they're working on. So yeah, it's a good,
very cool.
It's a good feeling.
So you mentioned a new show coming up November, you said? Is that around the time frame?
Yeah.
Have you already started working on it?
I'd have to.
I mean, no.
Yeah. No, if I said no, I think Ken would immediately like call me up after listening to this and be like, what? Yeah. No, it's like well along its way. I've got a few pieces I'm kind of wrapping up. I'm trying to keep it a bit smaller this time around. I'm trying to like a little more intimate. But yeah, it's like fully developed, in progress. Lots happening. I don't want to spoil too much, so I won't say too much.
Right on. Do you know around how many pieces you're aiming to have for it?
Yeah, I've got like the kind of list that I've made is around 12. Some smaller works than I've made in the past. But then we also have these 2 huge pieces in storage that I might throw in because nobody ever got to see those. They went to China, got stuck in China, had to be freed from China.
Oh, wow.
They're now in storage. So they never really got exhibited properly. So I'm like, what do I do with these? It was an unfortunate experience, but it happens. Like it happens to everybody. So I'm not super upset about it. It's more just like I want people to see those paintings because I'm like, they're great. They're the biggest paintings I've ever done and they're in storage.
That's wild. So were they meant to be for a show or a private collector?
Yeah, it was like a group show for a gallery that once the work got there, the gallery kind of closed. Like it was one of those situations. Wow. I hear about this all the time. And I had to be really intense about getting the work shipped back. And they were like in the contract, they were supposed to pay for the shipping back, but obviously they did not. But yeah, it was a real, like, we need boots on the ground situation. We have to find these paintings. We have to get them back. And Dasha being the angel that she is, angel gallery mother, den mother, like put together all that shipping for me, because I remember just being on the phone with her being like, I don't know the first thing about shipping back from China.
Right.
Yeah, so she helped get them back, and they're just hanging out.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. So for people that are interested in the new show you have coming, the work that you have in the group show, as well as the next iteration of these online classes, where can they like connect with you and stay up to date?
Yeah, Instagram is always a great way when the algorithm is feeling like it wants to show you my stuff. I do have a website, just meganellenmacdonald.com, where I have my classes and like works. And I have a mailing list on that site, which is the absolute best way to hear from me straight to your inbox. So definitely the mailing list, I highly recommend. 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I mean, with the faltering of social media algorithms, I feel like that's like the one reliable thing if you want to stay connected with somebody. Yeah,
it's so strange. I was telling somebody the other day, like sometimes I think good friends of mine, I'm like, wow, they really haven't made anything in a while. And then I realize I just haven't seen it. Like it was, I can no longer just, I can no longer just kind of hope that Instagram shows me their stuff. I have to really like check in on people.
Yeah. So last question, and this is something that I like to ask everybody. Who is one artist that you'd like to see me have on the show?
I thought about this one. I know everybody says they think about this. I prepared. But then it came up with like 3, and I was like, I don't know which one I want to say. Definitely, I think in the vein of like thematic still life. Stephanie, she is somebody who I met when I was in LA. She's doing these like really cool, like Baroque still life, but they're photographs, but then they have like cultural references in them. I would love to hear more about what she does, and she just seems like such a fun, interesting person. But then I also have to give a Canadian shout out to Winnie Trong, because she's so charismatic. I feel like she would be an amazing person to do a podcast with. That would be my top 2 right now.
Awesome. Well, great suggestions. I appreciate it. And Megan, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today. This has been a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. This is great. This is way less nerve-wracking than I thought it was going to be.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. So.
Yeah.
So that's it for this episode of Art Affairs. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Megan. It was really interesting to hear her talk about the conflicting or contrasting nature of her work, the way that she depicts nature in a very unnatural way, and about how that focus changed over time as a sort of evolution of her early still life work, allowing the elements of her still lives to go out into the world and develop their own ecosystem. I really love that journey that her work took. It was also interesting to hear how her passion for still life was in part inspired by these 16th century female painters who were constrained to only paint still lifes. They weren't allowed, or it wasn't accepted to paint anything else, which in turn resulted in the development of this rich, hidden language of symbols. You can definitely see that at play in Megan's work. And what about her colors? I mean, oh my God, I absolutely love her mastery of color and the vibrant palettes that she uses. It's wild to me that could be frowned upon in the Toronto art scene. I mean, yikes, embarrassed for them. But yeah, I'm really glad that she found her place in the US art community where her work could be appreciated. It sounds like Megan has a lot of new work coming out in the second part of the year. A painting for Hashimoto's 10-year anniversary, and then a full-on solo show in November. So really big year for Megan. Be sure to follow hers and the gallery's Instagram, and even better, subscribe to her newsletter to find out more about these shows. So thanks again to Megan for joining me today, and thank you for checking out the show. I'm truly grateful for your support. And just a reminder, one big way you could help out if you're really enjoying the show would be to check out the show's Patreon. You can find all the details on patreon.com/artaffairs. And as always, you can contact me through my website at artaffairs.podcast.com or on Instagram at artaffairs.podcast. So until next time, be good to yourself and be good to each other. Cool, so we'll cut there. What'd you think?
Perfect.